What have you been doing today?
Refreshing our books, to be honest with you, mate. Try to remember them.
Yeah.
What did I write again? No,
it's tricky, isn't it, to do that?
Went out for a stroll as well, which is quite good. In a absolute gale up here. It's just been. Are you up north?
I'm in London.
Miserable.
Yeah. Are people in the room now? Do we know? It's hard to know if anyone's here without the old.
Should we just say at 25 to we're going to commence?
Yeah. Well, so if anyone is here and wonder why we're not talking eloquently about novels yet, hello, people are here.
Hi guys.
Great, excellent. Right. Well, that's great. Well, we can begin now. I am Luke Brown, and I'm in conversation today with James Clarke. Welcome to Manchester. I am in Manchester, Lewisham, southeast London, whereas I believe James is in Manchester. Is that correct, James?
Yeah, I'm in the real Manchester, the real.
Excellent. I'm going to try to play two roles in today's discussion. Sort of the role of slick chairperson and the role of provocative intellectual novelist. Neither of which roles particularly suit my skill set, so we'll bear with that, I hope, and make the best we can of things. I'm really looking forward to talking to James tonight about his marvelous second work of fiction, Hollow in the Land, which I have in my hand. I'm in a sort of double role as well, in that I work for James's publisher for 2 days a week, and one of the first things I did when I got there, started in February, was read this novel, and was very excited to read another such a fresh and original voice from Lancashire. We're both Lancashire novelists, that's the other thing, from the complete opposite sides of the county. I'm from Fleetwood, Lancashire, which I don't know if you know, is a little former fishing town just north of Blackpool. Very urban place, but with the sort of beauty of the coast around. You can see across the Lake District, some of the more rural areas in the distance that James writes about. So let me just quickly introduce myself, and then I'll introduce James, and we'll do a reading each to give you a sense of the places we're writing about. My novel's actually, my second novel, Theft, came out this year, and it's a novel about a man from Fleetwood, adrift in London, trying to break into a sort of affluent world he superficially seems to swim in, but as the novel progresses, you begin to realise to the full extent to which he's drowning, I suppose. So I grew up in Fleetwood. I live in London these days, but I'm also in Manchester a lot, where I teach at one of the various excellent writing programs there at the University of Manchester, the Centre for New Writing. And like I say, I work 2 days a week for Serpent's Tale, who published James Clarke's superb second work of fiction. Let me move on to James Clarke, who is from, as I believe, Rosendale Valley, Lancashire, where many of these stories are set, or in a world like that. I'll ask James later to tell us more about that. I think he's the expert on that place, and you'll get such a great sense of it from this book. James is a prize-winning novelist. His debut, The Lytton Path, won the Betty Trask Prize, the prestigious Betty Trask Prize. He wrote that novel while studying at the Manchester Writing School, one of the other prestigious writing academies in Manchester. Lives in Manchester, where he's working on his third novel. There was a rave review of Hollow in the Land by John Harrison in The Guardian, and I thought I'd just, before James reads, I thought I'd just read out this quote from it, which I thought really captures some of the interesting. Hang on, I can't see. Oh God, people said they can't see or hear the speakers. Can everyone else hear? Yes. Well, yes. I'm sorry for those who can't hear. Anyway, it seems okay. People can hear. I'm sorry for those of you who can't. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Thank you for letting us know. So yeah, I was just going to read a little section of that review, because I thought it was a particularly good description of the place and the type of people in the place. So yeah, he says, everyone in this novel is having an affair or suffering from something: skin diseases, allergies, brain damage from a fall off a quarry truck, perhaps just a simple puzzlement. They've been drunk since they were kids. They live between work or the lack of it, by day and by night at Brooklyn's Wine Lodge, where on a Friday the bouncer is a member of the Valley family you wanted to mess with least. They're all suffering static flight reflex, but it's given them a sense of humour, a distance recognition and tolerance of other people's flaws, an outlook that flip-flops from kindness to violence and back across a round of drinks. One of the real strengths of this collection to me is the wide reach of imagination that James captures a wide section of society across this small part of the country, I guess. So yeah, James, do you want to introduce us maybe to one of the? We'll talk later about whether this is a novel or a collection. It might be a novel formed of stories. It might be a collection of stories. But certainly each chapter in this novel, as a novel, works as a self-contained story too. And I think James is going to read from one of those.
Yep. So I'm going to read from a story that is midway through the book, and its name is Waddington. I'm going to read right from the beginning of the story, so I don't really need to contextualize it too much. And as Luke said, most of the chapters all of them, they're all interconnected in some way, but they all also work as an independent, work in their own right. So without further ado, the Ribble comes through Waddington as a brook, and you can fish with your hands in it. Lowry and me used to do this back in the day before graduating to drop lines, the cane pole, and then tackle, car batteries when we were shit-faced. In those days, we were supervised by Lowry's dad, who I only ever knew as Mr. Lowry. Mr. Lowry was curious for a lot of reasons, but mainly because he only had the one arm. Yes, I found it weird. Mr. Lowry was older than most dads. He would have been about 60 by the time Lowry and me were 10. He wouldn't have known it other than for his white eyebrows and the tufts of hair that sprouted in clutches from his ears, as sharp looking as those hairs you get on insects' legs. Mr. Lowry used to stand in the water a few feet away, or up on the road spinning his boot heels on the tarmac, clasping the railings overlooking the river with that lonely hand of his. Meanwhile, us boys would sift pebbles and corner stone loach. Then we'd spool them up and plop them in our jam jars. Lowry never seemed bothered by the empty sleeve of his dad's fleece. So while I often found myself fantasizing about touching his dad's stump, my friend would get on with the business at hand, his ponytail a plaited segment of skipping rope that would drop over one shoulder, grazing the rock gunk and sometimes the river, swaying always. Lowry usually caught more fish than I did. He had a knack for reading nature's patterns, its habits, and after earning his diploma in horticulture, he went on to become the groundsman at the local golf course, where he lived for many years in a bungalow overlooking the lake. Maybe 3 years into the job, Lowry got married, and after that it was just him and his pretty wife and a trio of doomed pet rabbits that neither of them ever stopped talking about. Egg, I call Lowry's missus. Egg. On this particular occasion, all three of us had the day off. Egg drove so me and Lowry could drink, and we travelled in Lowry's car, which funnily enough was a Golf, with me and Lowry sat in the back. Although they weren't the longest rods, it was always a pain in the arse taking them apart, meaning that whenever we went on these trips, we kept them whole and propped between us, creating a divide down the car's interior with me and Egg on one side and Lowry on the other. That morning, the rods tickled the front window, and once or twice slid over the dashboard, so Egg had to shove them away and go, "Can you not hold them, one of you? Fuck's sakes." Lowry pinched my arm when I tried to apologise. As the boot was full of crap from his work, the front passenger seat had my tackle box and the butty boxes, with room for not much else, whilst in the footwell was a crate of Guinness draft put there so Lowry couldn't get to it until we arrived. On the way to the river, he kept tapping my knee whenever we drove past any woman under the age of 40, and he kept going, "What about her?" Although in his accent it sounded more like, "What about her?" I suppose he thought Egg couldn't hear him over the radio. Cracking day for it. The sun blazed and the grass could have been fake, it was so vivid. J.R.R. Tolkien taught down Stonyhurst College, which isn't far. They say the Ribble Valley was his inspiration for Middle-earth, which might explain why Lowry and me were always so obsessed with Lord of the Rings growing up. Whenever we had more than one person in tow, we call ourselves a fellowship. I suppose that's what we were that day. Me ferrying the fishing stuff to the riverbank while Lowry and Egg got intimate against the Gulf sun-kissed bonnet. My thoughts went as loose as they often do when I'm in open country. There was loads of colour fighting through the short grass, meadow yellows, rowan berry reds and cotton whites, all kinds of qualities if you took the time to notice them. I remember a gun grey heron loping in flight directly over me. It was my job to set the bivvy up in case the weather flipped, as it was forever at risk of doing. Then I began to thread and weight the fishing lines. Downriver was Waddow Hall, which made me wonder what Peg O'Neill was up to. Peg is the ghost of a girl who was tricked into drowning in a well many centuries ago. There's a statue of her in Waddow's grounds, who was beheaded in the misconception that it would stop Peg's ghost from getting up to I don't know what. I have always believed in spirits. I must have got it from my nan, who held no trick with mummery, but did teach me in her gravelly manner that there are ancient spirit guides for each of us. Apparently hers was a Benedictine monk. Daft, isn't it? Well, there you go. We'll leave it there.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to pick a bit of my novel. I suppose what in the middle. Certainly, I'm going to need some contextualizing, I guess. Let me find out where it is. I could have planned this better. I'm going to read a little bit in which my narrator is travelling back to Fleetwood from London with a woman he's in love with, or thinks he's in love with. She's a sort of a writer who's married to, or is engaged to be married to a much older man, a sort of provocative intellectual in some sense, maybe slightly, a sort of old centre-left kind of guy. And he's ostensibly taken there, because he's taken her to the house he grew up in. His parents are dead, and they're wondering what to do with this house. The mother's recently dead, so that's all we need to know. And they've got there, and they're wandering around. Okay, so I'll read a little bit about the beach and the Wetherspoons, two places that are very important to me in Fleetwood, hubs of the community. And on the beach, with the tide in, it was still possible to feel optimistic about the town. The skies were the bright blue dye of the school shirts we'd worn on our first day back in September. The clean air filled our lungs and made us buoyant. We walked towards the site of our burned down pier, listening to the waves arrive so diligently, so faithfully. I told her the story of the bawdy comedian who some people suspected had set it alight. On the bay's horizon, I pointed out to Emily the mountains, the power station, the wide space where you could still see the cargo ships heading somewhere else to land. Though it was a clear, warm day, we only met a handful of dog walkers. We headed on and rounded the edge of the peninsula on the prom, past a statue of a woman and girl waving out towards Ireland. Bye-bye, bye-bye. I should have said this is the day after Brexit as well, in 2016. There was bunting strung up outside the amusement arcade from the Queen's 90th, I presumed, unless it had been put up that morning in celebration of the Leave vote. I pointed through the fencing to show Emily where the ships had docked, and we walked on into the town, where we passed 3 men in stationary mobility buggies, smoking and talking. A smoking man in a jogging suit pushed a little boy wearing Fonzie shades. Seagulls the size of microwave ovens swooped from the sky and scrapped for chips. There was life on the high street, people queuing for cash machines at the Iceland checkout, schoolgirls with white legs smoking, smaller boys buzzing around them in blazers. Giant Asda cast its shadow over the smaller shops. Pub, I said. Okay, she said. I think we can allow ourselves a few drinks. Yeah, I'll read the next section. Yeah. There was a party going on in the busiest pub in town. Beer mats objecting to Christine Lagarde winged through the air. The bar was packed deep. An incongruous hipster with a full Edwardian beard and an armful of sailors' tattoos, a mermaid, an anchor, a leaping shark, dispensed pints as quickly as he could pour them. Plates full of the remains of fish and chips were being gathered by a waiter while another brought fresh ones out the kitchen doors. Everyone smiled at us. All right, pal. All right, bud. A TV with the sound on, without the sound on, replayed the arrival of Farage in another pub very like the one we were in. Do you want to get out of here? I asked. No, let's soak up the atmosphere, she said. Paul, said John from primary school, whom I hadn't spoken to for 20 years. He shook my hand. We did it, he said. His head was shaved and there was a scar running from ear to ear. Yeah, I said. Are you back living here, he asked. Nah, just visiting. Where from? London. His eyes went wide. Rather you than me, mate. We found a table on the outskirts of the room and I bought us drinks. I saw people I'd worked with as a street sweeper at the council during my university summers. More people shook my hand, beaming. Is that your lass, Paul? She's a corker. London? How much is a beer there? You're a bright lad, Paul. Bet you're earning down there, yeah? I didn't like to disappoint them. I just nodded and fought my way back to Emily. Okay. That's me. Okay, well, so now James and I are going to have a conversation, a bit of back and forth. I would like, I've got Fleetwood fans in the house, that's nice. I'd like to offer you the chance to ask questions as well. Which you'll be able to ask via chat. We won't be able to hear your voices, unfortunately. We'll have to imagine them, but we will. But we'll invite questions, and there's a couple of things I should also say as well, in that this is an event put on through Manchester Libraries, who have copies of mine and James's books to borrow. We have also got an offer with Blackwell's, who will send you both books with free postage if you want. There's also going to be a competition. Some names will be drawn out of the hat and offered cocks. So yeah, hopefully you'll get to read our books. The best way to guarantee that is to buy it, because the ones in the library might all be taken out. But we also encourage the use of libraries. Sorry, here's the slick persona is wearing off. Anyway, so James, I wanted to ask you about place first. I think what we both read sort of extracts was slightly, in which our characters are slightly stunned by the landscape in some sense, sometimes. And maybe you could just tell us a little about the place you grew up and how it's found its way into the stories, this novel, this novel form of stories. What was it like growing up there, and what was why is it an interesting place for fiction, and however you'd like to tell us about the place would be very interesting to us, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I guess, as obviously we're all in Manchester, so I guess some of you will be familiar with the area, but it's the Rosendale Valley, which is where I went to school. Went for about the age of about 14. I went to school in Rosendale, and I went to sixth form there until the age of, so that was about yeah, so my very formative years, and then I spent my early 20s knocking around there because I didn't go to uni straight away. So the Rosendale is funny. I'd originally grown up around the Bury area. I spent my youth in my childhood around Bury, which is 20 miles north of Manchester, maybe 15. And then Rosendale's a bit further beyond. And I didn't really have any knowledge about the area until my parents really just decided they were going to send me to school there. They moved me away from the school I was currently at, and then said we're going to have a new start. Try it over here in Rosendale. It's basically it's a string of towns that runs through ostensibly just a one big valley. So there's a system of about 2 or 3 valleys, but in the all intents and purposes in the book, I just know it as the valley. And then within there, you've got a vein of towns effectively. It's quite a working class area. The weather's not great. I mean, it's the kind of town that we probably all know. We don't necessarily have to set foot to know it. It's when I was growing up there in teenage years, I just used to knock around, and it's one of those places where there's not really anything to do as a teenager. I think people start to migrate back there as adults because it's in this beautiful sort of like barren moorland is surrounding it, and it's just really quite picturesque in a lot of ways. But also in terms of actually the financial stimulus it's had has been next to none for years and years and years. It's quite poor. There's not that many places to hang out as teenagers. So a lot of my friends and I just used to knock around just on the streets, really, Rosendale, and just getting up to no good, really. Getting hammered, doing lots of drugs, is basically what we did. And that's kind of that environment and sort of being lost, really, just sort of bleeds totally into the book. The book's genesis was really, I guess, it started to take place piece by piece. I mean, ultimately it's a story of a place and people's lives over a period of time, and using a place as a microcosm to talk about the wider perspective of the world we live in and the UK today. But it grew effectively just in quite an organic story by story basis. So it's almost like making a series of paintings and then putting all the paintings together to make one big collage is what it is. The best analogy I could think of for it. And they basically all just started to come one by one, drip fed, really. And it's difficult. You realise that ultimately you're starting to cover every element of a place's existence. I mean, I started writing one story. I was trying to basically build myself up as a novelist. I was doing my MA at the writing school at MMU, and I had written a novel which became my first novel, The Lytton Path. But in the meantime, I was trying to my mind, if I was going to try and get an agent and get a deal and try and make it as an author, I was like, I just need to start writing as many stories as I possibly can and trying to build up a reputation. It's going to make me a better commodity when it comes to pitching myself. And then over time, all the stories were set in the one place. And over time, I realized that what I was kind of inadvertently building was just this patchwork, effectively, that was almost like it gave a truer depiction of what life was like than if it was to be one focus on 2 or 3 characters in one linear narrative. Just like that. So yeah, it was an accidental thing, really. I'd like to say I was smarter than I am, that I'd always had intended this by design. But when I realized what I was doing late, and then once that penny had dropped, it was then that it made the editing part of it a joy, really. And we were keeping in mind this place where you're from. I mean, what about you, Luke? Because you're from Fleetwood. I know Fleetwood. I know, it's similar to Rosendale. There's basically it's dominated by a supermarket. Rosendale's case is about 7 supermarkets in one 5-mile radius, and they're kind of like an algae smothering of the town.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a Wetherspoons and a few boozers, not much else. What's your experience?
Fleetwood is. I mean, it's similar, that it hasn't had much investment, but since the fishing industry began its sort of dramatic decline in the late 70s and onwards, it's been a town, on a downward slope in terms of employment and aspiration. Though, there's still a lot to say for it. I don't want to characterise it as a deeply depressing place, but it's certainly like you. I spent my early youth drinking on the beach. But we got picked up and taken by some youth workers once on a weekend, and the other people in this place where we were, being taken away from booze were from Rosendale. Actually, there were some girls from Rosendale and some lads from Fleetwood, and we had obviously ended up on this sort of youth worker trip. Anyway, I digress. But yeah, it's in many ways it's a nice town. You know, it's pretty, but there's something about the landscape that is a bit like I think you describe in your landscape. There's something is. The beauty has a bleakness to it, you know, and can. What is beautiful about it is also what can be quite oppressive about it, I guess, as well. You know, the sense of this sort of abandoned landscape, the sort of bleached. Well, yeah, the emptiness of the view across in Fleetwood. Certainly, it's very much at the end of things.
Yeah, when the tide's out there and you've just got up and there's that area with that Russell Point up on the coast up there, and it's just like you see on ferry miles away, and you just feel so isolated, I suppose. Like knocking around Rosendale, I mean, I go walking all the time now. I absolutely love it, but at the back then, I was sort of living in around there. It was just no way you would ever go up onto the hills. Like, why would you ever do that? So it was like a little bit of a cauldron of lives, really, just rocking through the valley, and just all these interactions. Everyone knows each other in these sort of. Even when I go back now, I tend to find myself. Like, just if I drive through, I'm just looking out just to see if I know someone. It's just that element of familiarity, which is lovely. I mean, what I think you do so well in your book, and it's something I don't really attempt to do because I'm not sure I could do it in some ways. Is you really do imagine the lives of the people there, and you take a real tour of everyone who might be there. You go through the care homes, through the schools, through the farms, the pubs. You know, my novel is about an outsider really coming back. You know, someone who no longer feels like he belongs there. And you know, the Fleetwood features. I think he takes three different trips there over the course of the book. One for a funeral. It's a big suicide problem in Fleetwood as well. So he goes to his friend's funeral. There's an idea about, I guess, in some of these areas, that's like, if you do want to leave, you do leave it's kind of like a form of erasure, isn't it? You're erasing yourself in some way, like something about yourself, and then it's like, you know, what right to come back and then try to reacquire that, you know? And like there's a scene in Luke's book when short time after, I believe, that scene that Luke read then, where they go to a pub and the lead character Paul's looking at himself in a hand dryer and ends up smashing his face onto the hand dryer. And I wanted to kind of ask you about that moment. Is that related to that sort of loss? I felt like that he kind of goes through. He's moved away. He's tried to better himself. He's not really achieved that. And then he goes home.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what I was doing with that. It was instinctive that I felt needed some drama at the end of the chapter, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, I suppose. Yeah, I'm glad. If it works, I'm glad. But yeah, I suppose. Yeah, he doesn't belong there anymore, and he's he can't go back there, and yet what's the way in which he's been made by that place has affected in his mind. You know, maybe he's wrong, but in his mind, it's certainly affected his ability to get on and be happy in a different world. Whether it's because you know he hasn't had the same elite education, or whether it's because his parents have been, to his mind, destroyed by a job they've done that's very difficult. You know, to teach their teachers in this book.
Topic, actually, that dehumanizing aspect of work, that kind of like what is you and whether that defines you as who you are. As he works for that magazine, doesn't he? He works for a magazine called White Jesus, reviewing haircuts.
Yeah.
You know, it's that feeling, isn't it? Well, what does that do to you? I've worked in numerous shit jobs over the years, and just always it kind of starts to grind you down, doesn't it? What does it do to who you are?
Your book's very good on shit jobs, isn't it? And what
you know it so well. I think a lot of people who's pursuing a career in the arts, you can go down the route of, I guess, working at unis or trying to teach something like that, or you end up just working in shit jobs, just making it work in the evening or weekends, which is didn't want to do, but ended up doing for years.
Yeah. Well, certainly, like there are like aspirational jobs that don't, like magazine jobs and things, which I think are quite horribly exploitative industries sometimes. But and yours, but these are actually more kind of industrial factory jobs, aren't they? And it's quite. I mean, it's interesting to ask you really how that. Are you consciously trying to give a voice to those places, and do you see yourself as writing a tradition that does explore the lives of the people doing these shit jobs? In some way, my character's got quite a nice job in some way. He works in a bookshop and writes silly stuff for a hipster magazine. He's in the scale of shit jobs. He's actually somewhere
right, isn't it?
around the middle. There are worse ones, aren't there? Working in, I don't know, like abattoir or whatever. But yeah, I mean, do you see yourself writing in a tradition of sort of working class fiction or northern fiction?
That's tricky because I wanted to write about everyday people's lives. I wouldn't myself as a working class person. I grew up knocked around in a working class area for most of my youth and stuff like that, but I think it would be disingenuous of me to suggest that I was.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in the fact there's just there's stories everywhere, and I think there's a lot. We've all read a lot of stories about the aging uni professor or something who's got his having an affair or something. Like you could have that.
That's a novel. No, it's not really.
Yeah, I'm just like yeah. So, but like, I just think it's interesting to spread the net as a bit wider, basically, and you can still capture moments of universality and transcendence and grace throughout the most mundane fucking areas. Like I think nothing's off, but like nothing should be off limits, so long as you're being true. I think that's one thing. I suppose, like if I'm trying to write about, say, a character in care, which I was, luckily my partner used to work in a care home, so I was able to sort of speak to her about it and get a good, true sense. I wouldn't want to try and write about something and just like be bogus about it.
Yeah,
so that's definitely tricky.
Yeah. So was there a lot of research in imagining such a range of people from across that valley? Or were most of them people you knew, or you said that was one? Were you consciously trying to think, well, this is somebody who I haven't written about yet, and did that involve like research and imagination?
Sorry, I used bits. Yeah, it's a real mishmash. I think most of my stuff is. I mean, I wrote about the miners' strike first in my first book, and that involved a bit of research. Whereas this one's not really. I'd lived a lot of it, and I think the people I knew had lived things. I had a good friend of mine who'd been to prison before, and there's a story within the book who's it's about prison, someone who's come out of prison. So it's easy. I could use some of the things that I'd seen him go through and things like that to inform what I was doing. And then obviously you have a fair bit of whack of imagination in there. I mean, a lot of the places in the book don't actually exist, and this is a version of the valley, like I've posed a form of it, and I've messed around with the geography a little bit here and there. But research, I think you can get a bit bogged down with it, can't you? Like it seems so intimidating, the idea of doing it, and like you just want to be just at home in your pajamas and noodling around on the computer, getting something eventually.
Yeah.
The thought sometimes going out and speaking to people could be a bit.
The weird thing is, I did a lot of the research. I thought, so I think I can write about Fleetwood from memory, and then I suppose I realised actually. My memory is coming home. I'm there a lot, but I'm there when I'm seeing my mum, and so it's my experience of it is Asda and Wetherspoons, and actually I did a lot of I did quite a lot of research after I'd written the novel, and that I wrote this long read for the Guardian about Fleetwood, and that's when I realised I should have done it long before. Actually, I probably would have, there'd have been some more interesting characters in there because, the people I met like in food banks and. Talking to all the people working in the community, trying to.
There's a character in your book who works in a supermarket, wasn't there? And isn't there a friend of yours from that article who works?
Yeah. So I've got a friend who works in Asda. and yeah. I suppose yeah. I mean, I was. I mean, it's they're not the same character in any way, you know. But
What made you leave the North in the end?
Uh, well, actually, you know, I went when I was 18. I went to the University of Birmingham, and I just stayed on there. Really, I liked the city, and I was lucky enough to get a job after university. So I suppose I knew, you know, I was never going back there really, because I couldn't imagine what work I'd be able to do there. It was just taken for granted that, you know, the kind of things I wanted to do in books or the aspirations I had were not possible there. You know, like, where would I? You know, I couldn't think what I could have done.
That was massive to write about. Actually, that sort of the idea of like where do you go? You can't achieve what you want to achieve in not a lot.
Well, that's the narrative now, isn't it? It's the countrywide, isn't it? You have to go to the cities, you know, if you want a certain type of job, and that's, and you know, that's seen as the sort of aspirational. But you know, I think that you're in danger of forgetting what the good things about a place are that stay. You know, that sense of community, of people knowing each other and helping each other, and it runs counter to the kind of city leave to succeed sort of neoliberal dream, I guess, if you want to politicize it. You know, that you move where the work is, and individualism is more important than community. Sorry, I don't know where I'm going with this really, but I say yeah. I suppose what I realised when I was writing that, I was worried about portraying the place as a broken place, you know, whereas actually there is things.
Respect, isn't it, as well? That's it. You don't want to be like you need to be being true to a place, but there's light and dark in these places as well.
Yeah, a lot of light. Yeah,
all writing as well.
And what about you? Do you still go back to Rosendale as that place you still feel a connection with and know people in? And
yeah, I've got loads of mates who still live there. It seems to be like a bit of it's the kind of place as a teenager you wanted to leave, and then you find yourself realizing it was actually all right. And then a lot of people like get older, they just go back there because it's kind of you know, it's still lovely. And there's been a lot more investment now there, and a lot of my book actually takes place in really over effectively like a 15-year period from the noughties right up to the 2019 is the last story. I don't actually specify that, and during that time in Rochdale, there used to be a big arcade right in the centre that's full of boarded up shops, and it just used to be a bit dangerous to walk through at night. To be honest with you, you could get started on pretty easily. Awful bus station right in the centre, but a lot of that stuff's gone now. It's all been bulldozed and some nice bars and stuff. So people are there. So it's Is that because it's becoming a commutable place to Manchester as well? Is that or is it? I think that's always been a problem for it, because it was it's basically you could only really get to Manchester from one bus, and then that would stop. Whereas a lot around Northwest, as I'm sure a lot of people from Manchester know, it's like accessible by tram now. But Rosendale, they spent loads of money on a fleet of buses, and then after that they just didn't. So it was always really far away to get to. So although it's 20 miles away, it felt like the moon sometimes when you were growing up, and that's what I wanted to write about as well. We used to go out on the town in Manchester, and if you missed the last bus, you were just in trouble. So you used to try and sleep in like Piccadilly Station or something, just go upstairs and stuff like that, because you couldn't get home effectively, and that's quite mad considering it's all together, really.
You mentioned the people trying to start happy. That's something I remember very much about growing up in Fleetwood and these places. There's often an undercurrent of violence in these small places where everyone knows each other, and they've got, you know. I remember feeling safer in Birmingham when I got there, because no one would take issue with my haircut, you know, or something like that. You know, there was enough diversity going on to sort of distract people, and they had their own stuff to deal with. You know, you just wouldn't get attacked for some pointless reason, you know.
Small town grudges seemingly I hope they're becoming more of a thing in the past. But yeah, as a teenager, if you're wearing, I don't know, a pair of Converse trainers, or you had a bit. I wear glasses as well, and I used to always get called, like, one of the echoes used to be geek or geek. I used to get, and then another one, oh, get your hair cut and all that sort of stuff.
Oh man, we've got the same line.
Yeah, it's a fear of the other, isn't it? I don't know what it represents in some way, or is it just like beat just this person can it's a human, I can take the piss. I mean, I don't know where if you're right in the north, you can't avoid the fact that is a reality in a lot of the more provincial areas. Like, yeah, I can see the question there. Yeah, lots of anti-goth hatred in Bolton in the 90s. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Like, yeah, there was a. I mean, there was a terrible case in Rosendale that happened with the incident with a girl called Sophie Lancaster, who was a goth girl, and her and her boyfriend, Rob, that guy named Rob, and I went to school with Rob, so I knew him, and then they were basically attacked in Bacup, and she sadly passed away after what had happened, and that was almost like a culmination of this weird sort of dehumanization that had of, like, people who were a little bit different and tried to stand out, and it's a weird thing, and I can never quite explain why it happened. I don't know what it was, just a little vein of aggression that people just used to take out and stuff.
I wonder if it is some. I mean, I wonder if it reflected somewhere between people leaving and people staying, and that these signs of alternative cultures seem to sort of some way signifying, that maybe you're on your way out of there or something like that.
Or maybe you're better than them or something. I don't know. Or sometimes it was just literally to take the piss, but it went way too far.
Yeah.
It used to be like, used to get called moshers. That's what you used to get called if you wore a hoodie.
Yeah, me too. But I had a lovely little mob haircut, and I was not a mosher in any way, so I found that very offensive.
Still trying to dodge it now, Luke. Not a mosher. I mean, it's something you can't ignore, and I never really got that as much in Manchester ever. I've never had any problems there.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's just because it's the city is more multicultural, and it's like just where it's the Venn diagram blurs, I suppose.
Yeah.
I have to write about these things.
Yeah. We'll ask some questions from the audience. But I was going to ask you a question. Which I don't know. There might be some of the people I know from teaching at Manchester, and one of the things I've been teaching recently is how to write a short story, really, and it's made me think a lot about the short story and what a short story is. And I haven't written as many short stories as you, and I'm not a specialist in the form as much as you seem to be. So I'm just curious about what do you think a short story is? Do you have a theory of it, and how do you write one? I know it's a very open-ended question, but I was wondering if you come to a level of knowledge by writing so many and
it's not very easy, to be honest with you. I think a really good interview with an amazing short story writer called Joy Williams. She's an American legend, and she was married to I think the boss of either the Paris Review or GQ.
Brooke Hilt from the Esquire magazine.
There you go.
Yeah.
So she said that the short story, the novel, as you read the novel is like trying to be your friend. It kind of wins you around to the tone of voice, and ultimately you usually have some form of resolution, and it's sort of you get drawn in and swept up. That's often what I personally am looking for in a novel. But she said the novel's trying to be your friend, but a short story has none of those obligations towards you, and they're usually a lot nastier. They don't really owe you anything or really necessarily want to give you anything. It's often just a moment in time, and often at the ending usually there'd be some kind of moment where the character can't. They recognise where they are, and they either can change for the good or they can never change. And there's usually a moment at the end. I guess it's about ambiguity as well. Which I think your book, again, just because I can turn this back to you actually now, Andy. So, but because ambiguity is very important in a short story. I don't think you never need to tell. You can leave stuff out, and you just it's much more powerful, to my mind, to often have something where you don't know and you fill in the gaps. And your book's quite strong for that, particularly in the way that Paul interacts and what he does, really, his motives. I mean, ultimately he's going into this as a way it means to seduce the girlfriend of this intellectual and this intellectual's daughter at the same time. Apologies, a slight spoiler there, but
it's all right.
What about how did you approach that? You actively try and think about leaving it about ambiguity in your work?
Well, I suppose in my narrator, I don't want him to fully understand what motivates him, you know. So when he falls in love with this woman, it's because he's trying to attractive and because he likes the mind, and it's also because he's angry, you know, and because he's trying to, you know, he's full of rage about intergenerational equality, you know, that he can't afford a house, etc., all these things, and this sort of, so he's railing against the whole system as well, you know. So, but I don't want him to know that, you know. I don't, and that actually and it's actually quite, you know, disturbing, really, when those kind of elements of power become involved in the way that we are attracted to people, and you know, he does, you know, at the same time, he does pursue a relationship with the guy's daughter as well, partly as a sort of partly in he's trying to climb the social hierarchy, really. So, you know, like, and hanging out, you know, he enjoys her company. It's not all manipulative, but yeah, I suppose I wanted there to be some. I didn't want it to be clear. I wanted there to be some moral ambiguity. You know, I wanted him to be sympathetic in some ways, and also, you know, to be these things that he's angry about to have made him monstrous in some way. Like, I think the things I am angry about have made me monstrous in some ways. You know,
yeah, that's well said. That.
Yeah, I'm not that monstrous, I hope, but.
No, but it's true, because that's what, you know, you can't often justify it yourself, and you want to be really true to life. You always should be trying to be right truth and not be afraid to write stuff like that. And you don't need to have a likable character, but they have to be relatable in some way. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of he seems to divide reviewers, that character, in that, you know, it's like some people have reviewed it, some women have said he's great, he's, you know, he's likable, he's really likable in spite of being a bit of a dick, you know. Whereas a couple of you know, I think a reviewer in the TLS really hated him in a way I took exception to, and wrote a letter to the TLS to point out, you know, the various inaccuracies in the way she describes him.
Really?
Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Did you get a reply?
Not from her, but they printed the letter. She said he was like an affable he sees himself as an affable David Baddiel figure, and I was like, well, he doesn't really, you know. Like David Baddiel's. Wow. Bridge and etc. I don't know. Anyway, the difference is, I think the fact is that he liked football and wore glasses. You know, so the reviewer had decided he was he saw himself as a David Baddiel football. You know, it's stunk of well, a not very involved read, in my opinion.
That's the problem with being ambiguous, though, isn't it? The fact that you've been open to it's more satisfying and truthful, and therefore someone might well interpret it in a way that you weren't quite prepared for.
Yeah,
it's just one of the many pitfalls.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is. I do think we were, you know, I think good fiction is ambiguous, and there is. It's trickier to be ambiguous now, I suppose. Maybe it's harder for a man to be ambiguous at the moment because they're constantly worried of being convicted of a sort of thought crime, whereas women are aware of that. This, by the way, that's not saying it's easier for male writers than women. I'm just saying women are writing ambiguous fiction with well in a way that I think certain men may have become too cowardly to do these days.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's some fantastic female writers out there, but but I also felt personally just like I have to tread quite carefully with what I'm writing and how I'm framing it. My new book is basically about it's similar. It's got like a bit of an unlikable protagonist in some respects.
Yeah,
and it happens where he basically is responsible for a woman getting injured. Basically, I'm having to kind of add his own kind of an affair in it as well. I don't want to give too much away, but things like that you have to be careful about, don't you? Like how you frame it. Although these things do happen, I mean, maybe it's like that.
Well, I mean, you can't. We don't want a situation where we have to portray characters as our protagonist as perfect, do we? Or our protagonist as infallible.
It's not as interesting when like people aren't fuck ups in some way, I suppose.
Yeah,
you need that. There's people that like full of frustrations and collisions, and you gotta like
and maybe that's where some of the sort of northernness comes in, or that in these slightly ruined communities, or that there is more potential for those pitfalls and those accidents and those there's not the same temptation to stick to the sensible track, because there's less to lose really by falling off it,
There's a lot of nihilism as well to a certain extent. I find in there. In the city as well, Manchester as well. Like people like they just make their own rules. It's a bit like the world's messed up, so there are no rules, or there's the world's messed up, so we'll make our own rules.
Yeah,
very shit version of what Nietzsche said, but that's basically what I reckon so many people live by in that way, and that is what we were talking about before. That sort of like fear of the other and begrudging, because it's just like there are no rules. It doesn't matter. We're in a neglected place.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're out of the spotlight of the capital. This is what happens out there.
Yeah. Well, look. It's built for an hour. We don't have to end exactly on the hour, but it'd be good to take some questions before we do go. Anyway.
Sure, totally.
So I know that people have been popping up questions all the way through, haven't they? But maybe we'll look at the. Oh.
I'm scrolling now. I'm going to scroll.
Okay. Do you want to pick one and put it to us?
Yeah. All right. I'm going to read Sarah's question here. I'm interested to know what you both think writing the North means. After all, there are so many different versions of it. I've chosen a big one here, haven't I? Different ethnicities, socioeconomic groups, etc. Do you think Northern literature has any unifying themes? As you said, I think a famous trusted other runs through a lot of novels set in the North. Yeah.
Well, I think you should answer that, James, because you're the one who's done more imaginative work in your thing to capture a range of Northern voices, I think, not in your novel. I
think I've got a couple of things that I mean, obviously I'm from the North. I've spent most of my life up here. But I did do the London thing for 5 years, but beyond that, I've spent all my time up in Manchester and Lancashire. And then I've read a lot of stuff as well, and I think a lot of it's about like that kind of clash between like an urban world and a rural world. And I think it's about those like what can happen in those like little liminal spaces between these areas, and often so you kind of have that side of it where there is like a rough, raw country out there, and there's a bit of a metaphorical power to that country. And what that means for the human psyche, I think that's something that is quite relevant. It's certainly what is a big part of my writing.
Yeah.
I mean, you go looking back to writers like, I don't know, Barry Hines or like back in the day, Rick Kez and stuff, or more modern writers like Ben Myers or Andrew Michael Hurley's guys like that. They're quite taken. A lot of what they write about is about the power of the landscape and the world around them, and that is I think that's definitely synonymous with Northern fiction today. And I think that's important because it's so buried, all these towns, especially sort of where Rosenhill is, it's just buried in these hills, really. I mean, in towns, there's a lot of people there, but ultimately, all surrounding on all sides is vast, great moorland and stuff. That's definitely something. And then the money or the lack thereof is another big thing. I find in people who've fallen through the cracks, often through no fault of their own, often just because that's the only place they could ever have gone. There's a lot of great writers out there right now, like tackling, like the North and what it's like. It's post-industrial, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Do you think sometimes that there seems to be a sort of rural northern tradition coming up, doesn't it, with like Ben Myers, I guess, and some which you're adding to as well, and
yeah.
Although there's a lot of it. It's an urban environment as well. That's what I like about yours. That it really mixes between the towns and the landscape. Of course, a lot of people in the north don't live in very urban environments, don't they? And
I think a lot of it'd be good to explore that more. Really, I suppose that's something I'd like to do is move on. Really, just to it's not the north is not just the northwest. We talk about the north, but it's so many broad bloody diaspora, that isn't it?
No, exactly.
There's a lot, and there's different lives and different. How do you describe that? Really, it's got quite a lot in common. I find with some of the Scottish literature, like James Kelman and all Irving Welsh, Alan Warner, those guys.
Yeah, and the Irish as well.
Massively.
Someone like Colin Barrett and Kevin Barrett, they feel like that's they're Northern writers, aren't even though they're Irish writers. But
we'll claim them, shall we?
Yeah. But I suppose they find it easier to write small towns, and the Americans write small towns well, don't they? And for some reason, the English has come to it not quite as easily, I guess.
You don't want to be too parochial either. That's the thing. It's a tricky balance, isn't it? It's using the micro to be like to look at the macro, I suppose, like the bigger picture. Like
I
think that's key.
Yeah, because there are those big wider societal themes in yours. Like you do get a picture of a change in England, I guess, over the course of your novel as well. Collection, whatever it is. Can't remember what.
It never helps tell more. That's what it is, basically. The question.
Should we have a look at another? God, there's a lot coming up, aren't there? Ashley's question here looks interesting. What advice would you offer to young people trying to reconcile the lack of opportunity in their rural coastal northern community with the strong link between their identity and their community? Well, it's a good question. I don't know if I have any. I don't know what I would say really.
So the lack of community, you still feel tied to that place, right?
Yeah. It's very hard to know what advice. I mean, I suppose you can feel part of your place and still go to the nearest city and work, of course, but that's a glib answer, isn't it? Unfortunately, that's the big anguish, isn't it? It's like, do you leave? Do you make that traumatic wrench between your place, or do you find somewhere that you may have to do something? That you don't have. That's the great problem, isn't it? Of one of the societies. I mean, I suppose my advice would be like not to feel it's showing a lack of courage to want to stay, but equally don't, you're trying, but it's not, I don't think everyone has to subscribe to this narrative that the way one succeeds in life is escape and urban living, but equally, I mean, that's certainly what,
I suppose it's
certainly I found that an easier way of being happier in my life is to move to the cities, first Birmingham and London, and where I found it easier to find work that was suitable to me. I mean, it's I suppose it was a bit different for me. My parents were incomers in Fleetwood, so I never felt I didn't have quite the same like generations deep ties to the town. It was probably easier for me to walk away and not it's not that I haven't looked back. My mum's still there, but
I think you can still exploit the identity and ties to a community.
Yeah.
Without if there's no opportunity, then you don't necessarily have to stay, and you can still explore that. I guess to an extent that's what I did. Tried to talk about being from a place and what it's like to be from a place, but whilst actually not being there. But maybe that's the way to be truest to it is to be there and to live it and to keep doing that. But it depends what I mean. If you're talking about in terms of writing and creativity, But you don't necessarily have to have an answer. You can just you could talk about the issue at hand. I mean, that's ultimately what we're talking about, truth there, aren't we? In at all times with our work, with our creativity, and I think that's that's something to explore in its own right. That's just a huge subject matter, isn't it? Do you choose yourself, or do you choose what? How do you define yourself, and what is that? Is that to do with the North, or is it to do with you? What comes first, and which one do you want to prioritize? I suppose. And how would that take place?
Yeah.
It's a big old, it's a tough cookie, that
one. Do you want to pick a question, James?
Yeah, go on then. All right, let's have a look. John, was there a tipping point that turned you into a writer? I don't think there was a tipping point. I think it's like an accumulation of not really knowing. Always had an idea of what I wanted to do. That I knew I loved literature. I've always been reading all my life, and I've been thinking about maybe trying to write something, and then just never really getting around to it. It was always easy to just flick the tail or go out or whatever. I think there's some kind of quote somewhere. I'm gonna have to paraphrase. I can't remember who it's by, what it actually says, but it's like he said you should usually be trying to write from desperation. I think sometimes that it's something that be that desperation, maybe something that wants to get out of you. You have to kind of scratch that itch, or the desperation is your situation. I mean, for my part, I did an English degree, and then I graduated with the time as the recession in 2008. I couldn't get a job anywhere. I ended up working in like some evening data entry job down near Deansgate. It was awful, and so I ended up just leaving the city, went down London, and it was a similar extension of the problems down there, really. I just couldn't get a job anywhere, just worked in just various awful things. So it was more just like, right, I'm going to have to just do this myself. So that kind of tips it. And then I got one story published quite early on, and just that little hit of confidence was enough to make me think maybe I could do it. And I'd written some stuff during my prose workshops in Manchester. Met when I did a BA in English there. And then I did some prose workshops there, and I spoke with one of the tutors there. Who's still one of the main guys there. He's called Nicholas Royal, and he was very complimentary to me at the time. Just said you should kind of stick with it, and I just kind of did. But yeah, the tipping point really was I felt a bit cornered. I don't know, what was it like for you, Luke?
Early a story early on. I mean, I did an English degree, and there was one creative writing module in my last undergraduate. So I've completed a story. It was finishing a story, and then the next story I wrote. I was living in Birmingham, and I was on the dole for about 3 or 4 months. And I went in the local library. This is good to mention a library. So there was a flyer in Birmingham Library for a local press called Tyndall Street Press. Were looking for calling out for stories for a book that was called Birmingham Nouveau. I wrote a story, and they accepted it, and I just felt, that said little increments like that, and then so that gave me the courage to think, well, can I write a novel? And I wrote a novel which got me an agent, didn't get sold. Wrote another novel, didn't get sold. That was my second. The second one was a Fleetwood novel. So
you got 2 novels in the back at home that are unpublished?
Yeah. I mean, I wrote them when I was pretty young. So after the first one I wrote, it was just an exercise to see if I could generate enough words to look like a novel, really.
I did the exact same thing. I wrote like a 100,000 word novel that took me like 2.5 years to write. And then at the end, I was like, oh, I've done that. And it was awful. But I knew I could do it. That's it. You just got to get yourself the confidence.
Well, it's increments, isn't it? I can make that amount of words exist. Now I'll try and make them good work, or in the right order. Now. So yeah, I mean that's that. But what was the urge? Why did I want to do it? That's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, these are this process. I don't know. I always wanted to show off tendencies, I guess, in some sense.
Messiah complex, just Messiah.
I don't know. Yeah. Anyway. Well, should we ask a couple more then? Maybe I think we'll go 1:45, perhaps. I'm having fun. I don't know if you all are, but
I can't complain, actually.
There's a question by Mika I thought was interesting. Mika, so What's your experience of getting published? Do you think the London centricity of agents and publishers affects what novels get taken on, and what is considered interesting about other places? Well, and then also, what place does ideas of masculinity have in your novels? But why don't we answer that first question first, James?
Yeah.
Did you? Yeah, how did you feel approaching, trying to find an agent and approaching London publishers?
It was a nightmare for me. I think probably a bit naive in that the advice generally pointed me at the time pointed me towards the Writers and Artists Yearbook, and this is that book I'm talking about before, where it was like 2.5 years. It was basically a shit version of Happy Valley, if anyone's seen that, with Lancashire. So I kind of approached a few agents, but all the advice had been go on the Writers and Artists Yearbook and then just find the agents and write towards that. And you end up just writing. I just wrote a exhaustive synopsis. It was just huge. I think really didn't. I think so. That didn't really get me anywhere. And then after that, I kind of reflected that the book wasn't good enough. Then I decided that I needed to kind of set myself a little bit apart from the overall masses of people trying to become writers. What I perceive to be the masses of people trying to become writers. It might not be. So I did an MA, and then as part of that MA, I wrote what became the Lytton Path. Now that book, it was published, but I couldn't get an agent for that for love nor money. So I think my application was much better this time, but they just weren't willing. They didn't seem to be willing to take a book that was about the miners' strike. It was quite big, and it's all set up in Yorkshire in the 80s. It's a bit sprawling, I suppose, in hindsight now, having written something else and moved on to other things. But yeah, I just couldn't. I must have submitted to about 30 odd agents, and I got like 2 good no's. Majority was either silence or just automated responses. So I went to an independent press called Salt. They said they were interested, and then they said, but we can't publish it yet. So I had to then wait a year for that to be published whilst I was working in a retail job. So it was long and arduous. But then I'd gone through that sort of, jumped through the hoop and written a book, done the MA, got it out there. I then I'd been working on Hollow in the Land in that year whilst waiting to be published. And then off the back of that, then I had a review in The Guardian for the Lytton Path that I was able to use to pitch myself. I suppose you try and turn yourself into a package because ultimately they're running a business. They need to be able to sell you. And so that's just what you need to be able to say. I've got this MA, I've got this review, I've written this book. Then I got picked up for what became Hollow in the Land, and I got the deal. And then annoyingly, I won a prize for the Lytton Path. So it probably would have been a much better proposition for agents had I still been unsigned at that point. But that's just where it goes. It was massively London centric. I still don't know any agents up north at all. That might be my ignorance. But yeah, the publishers are mostly down south. There's a few presses up north. So do I think that affects whether they what novels get taken on? Yes. But I think the worm has turned slightly. There's a big move towards pushing stuff like this. I mean, we're doing this event about writing the North because people want to hear these marginalised voices now. So I think it's just you got to make yourself the best package you can make yourself, and ultimately I think if you're good enough, you'll get there. But you got to do your research and get to the right place. Well, put yourself in the shop window, I suppose. There's no easy. That's basically a long way of saying it's not easy.
No. Well, I had similar.
What about you?
I had similar things. My last I got dropped by the first novel, which didn't sell particularly well. I got picked up by a small press, a northern. Who are based in the north end of the stories, are based in Sheffield. It is. I mean, it is. I suppose the problem of London-centric agents and publishers is that they understand London, and so it's a fairly middle-class world, and their idea of readers is a London-based idea of readers. They've been doing that for a long time, I suppose, and we got to remember that. And obviously London is a paradise for books because you've got independent bookshops all over the place, in a place that, in a way that's sort of died out in regional cities. There aren't many regional cities. You get them in countryside and smaller towns and pretty places, don't you? But so I suppose there's a sort of in their heads, or whether it's reasonable or unreasonable, I don't know. That there's a novel about a miners' strike is going to be it sounds a bit too edgy. I mean, I don't think that. I mean, I think that's probably totally wrong. Actually, I mean, that's a fascinating part of cultural history, isn't it? That people. But I don't know. It's a really hard question to answer. But obviously, you want more publishers. There are some moving up, aren't there? The various people are saying they're going to open offices in Manchester and.
Yeah, I think Harper's moved up here now. I think there's offices up here. There's like Harper North now, and there's a Northern Alliance between another stories who publish theft, and that is these guys. Can you see that? Is that coming up backwards? Maybe it might. Oh, it is.
Yeah.
They publish theft anyway, and they're fantastic. And they're in Sheffield, and there's Dead Ink, and then there's Dodo as well. So there's a few other smaller ones, but in terms of the bigger ones. Yeah, and as totally what you were saying about bookshops. I mean, Manchester's terrible. There's hardly anything.
Yeah.
For independent stuff, so it's just not that. I guess there's not that many opportunities
to great Waterstones and Blackwells
platforms for guys.
But yeah, you're right. Sorry, carry on.
So yeah, it does. Things do need to change. I think they are. There's a lot. Manchester's got the UNESCO City Literature Award now. There's loads of fantastic. Nights like Bad Language and Verbose and stuff like that. I mean, I've never really read anything like that. I was always a bit too shy, but I think that'd probably be a good way to network and stuff like that. I mean, you probably end up at least getting your name out there to find out maybe if there was anyone up north that might be willing to take a bit more of a marginalised voice. But
yeah,
I think just try and work on your craft, get as good as you can, and hopefully you'll find someone who'll actually be willing to take a punt on you.
And I suppose the tricky thing is you have to sort of think about what the canny writers, or the ones who bestseller have some kind of thing that appeals beyond that, don't they? I mean, like Sally Rooney's just so many copies, and she's writing about rural Ireland or a sort of small town Ireland and mixed with sort of a city, and sort of but I suppose that fits neatly into that kind of aspirational Oxbridge world, doesn't it? She goes to Trinity. That it chimes nicely with. I mean, that's a story of sort of rising up the class hierarchy, isn't it, for the Connor guy? Anyway, I won't go on about that novel, which I quite like.
It sold an insane amount. I guess sometimes lucky enough to catch a zeitgeist. I guess, and she's a female writer in a time when people are looking for female voices as well. That's and she's very good. So fair play to her. So I guess you got your sometimes you'll be lucky enough to ride that wave. I guess. It's just I don't know. I just think stick to your guns and just go to a smaller agent if you can. My agent's like a bit more of a boutique agency. It's not Curtis Brown or these monsters, anything like that. Fantastic. Couldn't ask for any better. And that's someone to represent you and go to bat for you, really. And that's they'll get you in the room, and that's what. And then your book. That's what you deal, live and die on your words.
Yeah. I mean, that would be my advice as well when looking for agents. Just look for the young, hungry agents.
Yeah, totally.
I was lucky. I only wrote to one agent, and he took me on straight away. But he'd just become an agent after being a publisher, so I think I just got it exactly the right time when he had,
You only need one yes, don't you? I mean, like with the Lytton Path, I got turned down by everyone, and then said yes. Then with our public going to agents this time following the line, I got turned down loads. I got one yes there, and then with the publishers there, they all said no, apart from Serpent's Tale, and it's worked out great.
Yeah, I mean that is the game, isn't it? It really is. The one yes, and it's so easy to miss that one yes, But look, I think probably we've gone on an extra quarter of an hour, Danny's just saying Manchester Libraries are working with Manchester City literature teams to curate a collection of works by Manchester Northwest writers and indie publishers, and they're still looking for recommendations. So please do send them to Danny Middleton, who I need to thank too for organising this event, along with my colleague Flora at Serpent's Tail. So yeah, please do. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, James. I've had a great time.
You can still send questions on Twitter and stuff if you want. I don't mind writing back to a couple of people if you want to do that.
No, I'd be happy to join it. If you want to copy me, and my Twitter handle's my biggest Luke, and what's yours?
James R.G. Clarke.
So yeah, and hopefully we'll. I don't know. It'd be great to do this event again sometime in a real space, wouldn't it, James? And when the paperback comes out, I could ask you some more questions about it sometime. And we can sign some physical copies of the book. But I hope Blackwell's I've got a special deal on it, on both our books, and they're in the libraries, and we're gonna give some away as well. So please do be in touch if you want to talk. I know there are a few questions about prison. I'm sorry we couldn't get around to all of your questions, but we're very approachable. So we'll endeavour to get back to some more. Okay, then. Well, thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, thank you, James. I'll see you all later. I'm gonna log off. Bye.
See ya.